Welcome everyone to our final plenary session or the closing plenary session of this entire week-long workshop. We appreciate everyone staying with us throughout the week. And I see people are still coming into this closing session. So we'll give a few seconds to let people coming in again. And I'm sure the number will keep increase like all the plenary sessions happened in the past. And on behalf of the planning team, I want to say thank you again for everyone who joined our session or who joined our workshop and presented in the workshop in one way or another. So before we go into the discussion of the diversifying the future workforce in AI, around AI in environmental sciences, I just want to give a quick highlight of the workshop. First of all, we have 8 plenary sessions, including this one for the week, and from all the way of the high level perspective from NOAA and National AI Initiative from the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, and then move on to the trustworthy and responsible AI plenary given by the NIST, Dr. Elham Tabasi. And we also have a specific session focusing on trustworthy AI for social goods with Dr. Emily Roth and Dr. Pedro Rodriguez. And on Wednesday, we have a plenary session on fusing simulation and data science for weather and climate services, which is given by Professor Stephen Belcher from the UK Met Office, our international partner, and with the Dr. Laura Zena, focusing on the topic of AI for ocean modeling. As we all know, the ocean is a really important part for addressing climate challenges. So on yesterday, we have the opportunity to hear from some rising researchers and leaders in the field of AI research for weather, climate, fisheries, marine biology, as well as space weather on the emerging technology for NOAA missionaries. And this morning, we have the chance to hear about how we can bring groups together to build integrated and interdisciplinary AI development lifecycle. So today, this session, we're going to focus on the diversifying the future workforce. We all know that diversity in a workforce is important, especially in the emerging technology, to make sure that a product is trustworthy and equitable for all. So throughout the week, we have 44 scientific sessions, including both oral and poster sessions, focused on 8 different topics. And I don't think I should repeat this 8 topics anymore because people already heard that for so many times. But we really appreciate the diversity of the abstract we received this year. And we have 203 submitted abstracts for the workshop, and we have 325 registered participants from 34 countries. And out of all those 1,300 participants, we have more than half our student and early career professionals to share the results and listening to the cutting edge developments. We have more than 60% from our NOAA collaborators, partners, and other non-NOAA participants. And we have 175 international participants from outside the US. That shows the value of virtual events to make it possible to be inclusive and make sure all those participants who want to join us can have the opportunity to do that. And we have 150 registered participants for the hackathon, which we just had a really great discussion before this session. So in this virtual workshop, we use the different platforms from Sketch as our virtual lobby for the conference, to Zoom as a video platform, and to the Wonder as a virtual coffee and networking events. We had some lovely discussion there on how we can improve the future workshops in the Wonder space. And we have been mostly using Slack for our discussion throughout the workshop, and using Slido for this plenary discussion, and the Kiko chat as our main platform. And I want to give a shout out to ESIP, our planning partners, Earth Science Information partners, for making this all technology happen. Without them, we'll be at loss for sure. So here, everyone, a lot of my friends knows I love data. So I just did some analysis at data wrangling last night when I got those information. So we have a really a good kickoff on Monday with more than 400 participants joining us live. And throughout the week, we have 973 live participants, not counting any for today. So it's as of Thursday. And for most of sessions, we have more than 100 people participate in the session. So that shows another value of the virtual events here. It's challenging, but it makes it like more inclusive and diverse participants in this process. And another stats that I did is for the Slack messages. So we use Slack. We have 568 members in the Slack with some really active discussion. So Slack has some like delay in the stats. As of Wednesday, we have getting close to 1,600 message sent since the beginning of the workshop. And that includes the discussion and asking for help. So we have close to like 200 messages that people posted in the help desk to get access to different platforms. That mostly happen in the first like 2 days. But we also have a lot of people introduce themselves. We have 100 more people introduce themselves in the introduction channel. We have 400 messages sent in weather and climate channel, which have a really lively discussion about the workshop presentations and different ideas to collaborate in the future. And for the hackathon, we have like 150 messages throughout the hackathon way to engage with different members of the group. So this is a truly collaborating with 16 scientific committee members and 11 logistic organizing committee members and the supporting partner, the Earth Science Information Partner, as well as the support, great support from the NOAA National Centers for Environmental Information. So we really appreciate all the help to help the NOAA Center for Artificial Intelligence to host this workshop. And with that, I want to say great shout out to Chris Slocum, who is the chair of the LLC, and Jennifer Felford for the communication and engagement virtual coffee hours, Brian Mayer, David Fishman, Heather McCallum, and Christina Comer, and Eugene Lee, and Matthew Brothers, Paul Sclatter, and Jordan Watson, and Tyler Christensen. Without their help and support, this workshop will not be a success. And again, I want to shout out, their name need to be called out: Susan Shingeldecker, Annie Burgess, Megan Carter, Patty Allen, and Lindsay Barr, as well as Charlie Haley, who is our like engagement guru, help us to design all those engagement throughout the workshop. So huge thanks to Earth Science Information Partners, ESIP, for making this happen. And again, shout out to the Scientific Organizing Committee. On behalf of my co-chair, Eric King and Rob Redman, we have the pleasure to work with members from NOAA, including Sid Bokabara and Vladimir Krasnopolsky, and Greg Dusek, Ben Richard, who is also on this panel shortly, and Jeb Storr, who has been speaking in some of the plenary sessions as well, and Rama from the GFDL. And we have partners on the Scientific Organizing Committee, which is Nikunj Oza from NASA, Kirsten Dell from Met Office, Amy McGovern from University of Oklahoma, Philip Tisa from the Texas A&M Corpus Christi, and Sue and from NCAR, and Julie DeMoose from NCAR, and Bostrom from University of Washington, John Williams from Weather Company from IBM, and Jason Hickey from Google Research. And thank you for everyone making this program happening. And before I turn the mic to Rob Redman, my co-chair of the workshop, I want to invite all the participants to submit to the two spatial collection of the open access journal we are preparing for, including one on environmental data science and one on artificial intelligence for Earth systems, which is both guest edited by workshop planning teams as well as some of our partners. And we want to make sure all our development are open access, everyone can have access to it. And we also encourage everyone who can share their code or data to make it really reproducible to increase the trustworthiness of the development. And then I would like to invite Rob to share some of his own highlights.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Yes, what a wonderful week. Can you believe it's already been a week? So though we're virtual this year, fingers crossed we're in real life, in person next year. I know from my experience, we engage in so many deep and meaningful conversations. I'm really sure that these are going to promote partnerships that are going to advance AI for trustworthy, performant, and equitable Earth system science research and applications and solutions. So looking over the vast quantity of incredible presentations and conversations, I'm only going to give you a few teasers. These are from my cherry picking exercise this morning. We'll have recordings available soon. So if you didn't get to experience a great presentation, but you see something here, look over the Schedule page and look for things that you wanted to go to but didn't get a chance to. Look at Slack and look at conversations there. You'll be able to at least view the recordings from the comfort of your favorite armchair and with your favorite snack, a benefit of working from home. All right, so here we go. In the science and technology spaces, at the national level, on Monday, we had the honor of Dr. Lynn Parker from the U.S. Office of Science and Technology Policy, sharing her vision for the National AI Initiative that went into law in the U.S. in the last year. And also the NOAA perspective from our newly selected administrator, Dr. Rick Spinrad, and also from the UK Meteorological Office Chief Scientist, Dr. Stephen Belcher, on Wednesday, on sharing his vision of fusing AI in weather and climate and digital twins. We had several discussions on trustworthy AI for both risk management and social justice and good. We discussed the progress in developing an AI-ready data standard in collaboration with our partner, ESIP. We greatly expanded from the workshop in slow motion, the second version of the AI workshop at NOAA. We greatly expanded on new blue economy topics, looking at Slack with a very active session track and Slack channel. And then finally, space weather made its first year debut this year with several excellent presentations from sun to the surface of the Earth. It was also, to me, very cool to see all the social media on Twitter and Facebook with hashtag NOAAAI, even including commentary and support from past NOAA leadership. On AI for social good, you'll see we've woven a common theme here, even including today and even just 30 minutes ago in our past conversation. Developing a diverse workforce and using integrated AI teams with balancing the subject matter expertise is really needed to power our future discovery and innovation in Earth system science, and that this integration should happen as early as it can in the formulation stages. Next slide, please. Thank you. All right, so whether you didn't know it, whether you knew it or not, by attending, you joined our community of practice for AI. We received a ton of kudos, and the credit goes 100% to our logistics and scientific organizing teams and our partnerships that Douglas just so kindly thanked verbally. That's such an understatement, just really incredible work, brilliant efforts, and that's how this is such a wonderful, smooth meeting. From Erin Moreland, this is the most engaging virtual workshop I've attended. That really hit me right in the heart, so thank you, Erin. We heard from her during a coffee break. So yeah, maybe we're discovering a gold standard for virtual workshops, having learned from all the others that we've attended. You can see on the right-hand side from this word cloud, you've been statistically represented in a trustworthy manner. I grabbed all of the Slack conversations in weather and climate channel, and there's your representation there. So what's coming up next? We'll have a workshop proceedings of the abstracts, which will be published for the DOI, so you can reference your incredible work. And Douglas just mentioned 2 opportunities to publish your work in special collections. We'll have a survey from the organizers, and so we can discover what you loved and what you didn't, what we can improve on. I've heard one of the #1 things is to be in real person. Well, there certainly work on that. Douglas, can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you. So just kind of as a reminder of the pillars that we're developing the NOAA Center from AI from, and how much we're getting out of this workshop to do so. So our foundations are the National AI Initiative Act of 2020, and our goals are from efficient governments, advancing AI research, helping to accelerate it, developing new partnerships to get that done, and of course, maybe the most important thing is training our workforce on trustworthy, equitable, and socially conscious AI. And we're going to do all these things with our wonderful partnerships and teaming, and you'll see the same names, many of the same ones on the left side there. And all of this is built on top of the published AI strategy alongside the other science and technology strategic focus areas, which you can get to publicly. Next slide, please. Okay, so powering discovery and innovation. I used this slide in the beginning, so just want to remind you. So training plus AI-ready data or trustworthy pursuits, and will produce equitable AI-ready services. And you say that very well, but you probably get the gist. There's a fact sheet on what our NOAA has said, what our NOAA subject matter experts that we surveyed over the last year have said that they need. And you can get to that from our new website, noaa.gov/AI/training. And the key ingredient, you'll see there's a common theme throughout the week. We need NOAA-specific training material that removes common barriers. It's on scene, so scientists can train with the data they're used to. And we need to convert those NOAA AI success stories into interactive training materials in sandbox computing environments. So the phraseology we've been championing are learning journeys, interactive learning journeys. Next slide, please. So I think this is my last slide. Yes, it is. And so how can you connect with us? We have a new website. It's public, noaa.gov/AI. You can connect with our community of practice. We are in the full force multiplication space. We are not looking to take over any community practices, but rather help to combine and merge them and share best practices. We have a mailing list. You can contact our team directly. And then if you're inside the NOAA ecosystem, there's a little more material, and that's at that little site link there. And then critically, as we build out our public presence, we need help adding to our AI collaboration user stories. So thank you so much again for everything you brought to this workshop. And I know we're all super excited about this next half of this plenary. Thank you. Thank you. Douglas, back to you.
Thanks, Rob. As Rob mentioned, that we just gave a really teaser of the highlight workshop, and all the recordings will be available for everyone to watch, and we will send out notification. I promise that'll be probably my last email sending to you, because I know you already got like overflow of email from me at least every day. So, and with that, I want to introduce Dr. Eric King, who is the other coach of the workshop, to moderate this great and the important discussion of how, and I think I made an arrow here, and I should like change the title of this page, which is Diversifying the Workforce of AI for Environmental Sciences. And we have 4 great panelists, and Eric, I'm gonna turn the stage to you. And as a reminder, please coffee is not enough for me today. Use Slido for asking your questions, slido.com, using the event code NOAA AI 2021. And we will also send the link in the chat as well. Eric?
All right. Thank you, Douglas. And thanks for that introduction, and Rob for the summary. So I wanted to start this off with just some apologies to Star, who ran this conference the first couple of years. You know, I breezed into those conferences and thought, oh, this is nice, and I learned some things, and didn't realize there's a lot of work that goes on behind the scenes. In this case, I want to recognize in particular, though he was too modest to name himself, Douglas Rao, who I'm reasonably sure may be an AI replicant, because he is everywhere, texting, running everything. If he's perfected that technology, we'll present it at next year's conference for sure. I want to thank all the people who participated. Great energy around this conference. I can't beat it. People are so excited about this, and I've had a couple people tell me there's a palpable energy around it, which is awesome. We had a chance to build some great partnerships. It was wonderful to see NASA, DOD, UK Met Office, across the board that there are people working on this. NOAA is not in this alone. There is certainly a lot of avenues we can support each other and kind of harvest each other's work, which I'm really excited about. Technically, the conference has been amazing. I've seen all sorts of detection algorithms, ways to handle imagery, time series, the application of AI to handling this incredible deluge of data that we're all about to face. Wonderful stuff. And, I'm really excited to see all that we have to bring. But that gets us next to our topic for the panel today, which is our workforce. So one of the things we heard repeatedly throughout this, and very happy to have our social science teams on board, was that we need to have trusted AI. And one of the ways we're going to have a trusted AI is to make sure that we have representation, that we're integrated with different communities, that there is a true diversity on the teams as we come forward. Earlier this year, I was at a NOAA Leadership Summit and was, I guess, maybe not surprised, but disappointed to learn that NOAA is still not very diverse in its workforce. One of the things that stood out for me is NOAA is still 2/3 male, which is a surprise for me because it's changed a little in our discipline and our workforce out here in Boulder. But as an agency, we have a very low diversity among the science agencies and have had little movement over the last decade in that. Certainly part of that is NOAA is a slow evolving agency. Something like 60% of our workforce is retirement eligible. So we have a lot of people that came on board in the 80s and 90s, but it's something that we really have to do better. One of the things I noted with this conference is that I think we really in AI now have a chance to do something unique, which is we're bringing on a young workforce. We're bringing, these skills are new. We talked a lot this week about whether it's AI specialists that know some physical science or physical scientists that know AI, but really where you're going to get that as you bring on this new workforce. And so it would be great if we could do that right, if that these future conferences just look like America as we go forward. So I'm excited to do that. So let me give a brief introduction to the four panelists we'll have today, and then I'll ask them to introduce themselves. So first is Dr. Shirley Malcolm. She's the Senior Advisor and Director of the Sea Change at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and a really cool title. Dr. Allison Wilson is the Associate Vice Chancellor for National Security and Special Research at North Carolina State University. Danae Carlos is an award-winning meteorologist and Deputy Director at NOAA's GSL, the Global Systems Laboratory. And Dr. Ben Richards is a research fisheries biologist and also serves on the NOAA AI Executive Committee. So with that, would each of you please introduce yourselves and describe your journey, how it affected your view on the importance of diversity in the workforce. And I'll just go ahead and start with Dr. Malcolm.
Okay. Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity to join you here. And I won't take very long because I'm really interested in hearing everybody else's stories. My story, let me begin with something that is obvious, and that is that I'm old. Okay, and so if we start with the fact that I am old, the idea of a Black woman who has had her doctorate for like 40 some years, for a long time, is an interesting place to start, especially when I say that I was born and raised in Birmingham, Alabama. I came into the sciences, as it were, drawn by the kind of post-Sputnik push, and essentially went from all Black high schools and elementary school and community to the University of Washington. So I went into Seattle, if you could imagine, in 1963. And so I did not encounter a very diverse environment, but I stayed in the sciences. But the whole point of staying in the sciences was not always easy because there was isolation and, quite frankly, not a lot of people who look like me, either women and especially women of color. But that has shaped my career going forward. I was in a faculty position, but when I moved out of that faculty position, I got introduced to the world of policy. So I basically worked at the National Science Foundation, at the AAAS, et cetera, in many cases to try to bring about diversity, equity, and inclusion within the sciences, engineering, and mathematics, medicine. And that's a lot of who I am. And that's a lot of why I'm working on what I'm working on. And I think those are probably the most important aspects of my career and my life that I want to insert into this discussion.
Thank you very much. Dr. Wilson?
Hi, thank you. So as Eric introduced me, I currently am an Associate Vice Chancellor in our Office of Research at North Carolina State, but by disciplinary training, I'm a statistician. And so I guess that's going to be pretty obvious as I talk, because I'm going to tend to say data, and I'll tend to start with data and talk data all the time. But but I haven't actually been a university faculty member for a lot of my career. I've worked across multiple sectors. I've been at the National Institutes of Health. I worked for a 5-person small startup down in Fort Bliss, Texas, supporting the Army, at Los Alamos National Laboratory, doing policy work in DC. So I've really had the opportunity to do a variety of things. And I'm going to say, one of the things that I want to challenge everyone as you're listening to us on the panel today is I want you all to think about, sometimes when we talk about issues around workforce, around diversity and equity and inclusion, it's very easy for us to think about that as a problem for our organization. Surely NOAA, surely the university is going to do something about that. And one of the things that I want to take out of my experience is I want to challenge you to think about, how do you fit into that? I'll give you a couple of examples. So I still remember 30 plus years later, the faculty member who took 30 minutes out of his day to talk to me, the first generation college student, about how does this whole graduate school thing work, and where should I apply to graduate school, and should I apply to graduate school? And that was something that was, very specific, but it was something that somebody took an opportunity to work with me, took a little bit of risk to encourage me. I remember, one of my bosses who, the first time that they took a look and said, yeah, actually, I'm going to put you on that project with the really important visible sponsor, because I think it's important for you to get that visibility and get that opportunity. And so that's something that I want to challenge all of you to think about, not just sort of what should NOAA be doing in this space, but what should you be doing in this space? And what opportunities can you create, and what risks are you willing to take to help think about how to give people opportunities to move forward? So the second thing that I'm going to ask you to think about is, again, I'm a statistician, so I tend to talk about data science, where I'm trying to encompass this idea of how data is changing everything, and we address it through artificial intelligence or machine learning. But one of the things that I really think we need to do as we're thinking about the workforce is we don't want to think too narrowly, because, again, when we were introduced, we said, are we trying to hire physical scientists who know about AI, or AI people who know about physical science? I'm actually going to ask you to think a little more broadly. I actually think your entire workforce needs to start understanding data. Because if you think about this, who's creating the data, who's managing the data, who's reading the data, who's understanding, what the data says? This is not just a technical thing, but it's something that we are increasingly seeing, as I'm at a university and I'm looking at the students that we're training. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data science is touching every student that we train. The way that I really think about this is, and I'm going to say, I took a typewriter to college. I brought home a computer. But when I got to college, computer science and using a computer was something a small group of people did, right? Now it is unimaginable that every student at NC State doesn't touch a computer every single day. I'd be surprised if they didn't touch one every single hour with their phones, right? And so what I'm going to say is we need to broaden our thinking about the workforce, not just to the technical staff, but how is it that we really think about how data is going to really change what the mission is in what we're doing. So thanks, Eric.
Thank you for that introduction. Dr. Carlos.
Thanks, Eric. Really excited to be here today. You know, my background is in meteorology. I'm a 3-time graduate of Howard University in Washington, D.C. And mainly that's basically on the backs of others encouraging me to continue my education through the master's degree, through the PhD, all of those things. And, you know, when I think about kind of my career in terms of, you know, why diversity really has been important to my career and how it's influenced who I am today, you know, I have to think about, you know, my want and desire to challenge myself. You know, I've held positions at the Environmental Modeling Center. I've lived in Hawaii, working at the Weather Forecast Office in Hawaii and the Pacific Region headquarters for the National Weather Service. I've been a policy advisor to Dr. Spinrad and to the last Obama administration when they were in. You know, I spent some time working at the NOAA Homeland Security Program Office. You know, really doesn't have much to do with meteorology, even my meteorology degree or my focus on developing weather prediction systems. But, you know, I always felt, you know, the need for challenges, and you know, now I'm in Colorado, working at the Global Systems Laboratory as a deputy director. And, you know, when I think about that particular challenge, you know, all very new, all of these particular positions, very, you know, kind of new to me in terms of my ability to understand exactly what that particular role is going to ask me to do, right? And that's mainly because, you know, first generation professional, first generation college student. You know, my mom definitely worked in the office, but she was mostly the secretary, working for you know, just different people, and so that part really, her encouragement, my mom's encouragement. I still remember, you know, when I was 16, I actually did not plan on going to college. You know, I planned on taking care of my mom. I was not an only child, but I was my mom was a single parent, and I felt, you know, kind of I felt like I was the man of the house. I felt like I needed to take care of her. And in all honesty, you know, when I told her I wasn't planning on going to college, she was kind of shocked because I had good grades and all of those things. But, you know, she told me, you know, Danae, you should be thinking about college, number one. You don't need to take care of me. You know, I'm a grown woman. I can handle myself. And, you know, think about, you know, going outside of Oklahoma. I grew up in Oklahoma, born and raised in Tulsa, Black Wall Street, if you ever heard of it. And so leaving home was really a big deal for me. You know, leaving home meant for me, growing up, was going to Texas maybe. But I went all the way to Washington, D.C., to Howard, and actually, you know, met some folks while I was at Howard, a lot of mentors that looked like me, but also some that didn't look like me, that really poured themselves into kind of crafting and developing me as a scientist, me as a individual, me as a leader as well. And those are the people that I give a lot of credit to, because, you know, I didn't know what I was doing. I was really the type of person that asked a lot of questions and tried to learn from others, really, about being a meteorologist, being a scientist. You know, I didn't have a scientist in my personal life that I could, you know, really learn from. So those mentors were extremely important. And, you know, I didn't even actually know what NOAA was until I was probably 2021, you know, and I some folks at the Office of Education, within NOAA's Office of Education, you know, really introduced me to NOAA. And NOAA was partnered with Howard University. And so I would be influenced by, you know, scientists from NOAA coming to Howard University, speaking, talking about meteorology. Just imagine yourself talking about AI, especially if you're a data science or AI professional at a historically Black college and university. Those are the types of things that really influenced who I felt I could actually be. It gave me a vision for the future. And so those opportunities that you all take for outreach, just know that those are the opportunities that actually kind of change lives, because my life was changed by having NOAA scientists come to my university to speak about the things that they were doing, especially meteorology. So, you know, I'll stop there, and that's kind of my introduction and the impact of diversity for me in my career.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Dr. Richards.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks to Rob and to Douglas and everyone else for organizing this amazing workshop so far. Danae, great to see you again. Shirley and Allison, pleasure to make your acquaintance. I started out as a fishery biologist several years ago in Florida, working for the NOAA Sanctuaries program. And right now I run the bottom fish survey here in Hawaii. And so I think Allison and I are kindred spirits in terms of thinking about data and data science. And I started thinking about diversity in somewhat the same way. And I would challenge us all to think about what do we really mean by diversity? When we look at sampling programs, when we look at data collection, we're constantly looking at multi-gear surveys. You know, each individual survey gear has its own implicit biases. And by putting together multiple different gear types, we can get a truer picture of reality. And we can look at team building and building the workforce in much the same way. And so while we often think about diversity in terms of gender, ethnicity, various other aspects, we can broaden that to think about, life experiences, senses. My wife and I have a 7-year-old daughter now, and we are thinking about, constantly how to expose her to the broadest ranges of experiences possible. And so, COVID notwithstanding, travel, international travel is always, high up on the list of, how can we expose, in this case, personally, our daughter to the broadest ranges of experiences, the broadest range of ideas. No matter how we think we might do something, there's a myriad of other ways of tackling the same problem. And so when we're thinking about team building, when we're thinking about AI, we often talk about that AI is only as good as the training data that's used for it. And so looking at where the gaps are, where the blind spots are, where the implicit biases are, not just in the data, but in the teams that are creating the data. And as Allison mentioned, I feel very much the same way that the AI revolution is kind of exactly where the personal computer revolution was, 30 years ago, 20 years ago. 10, 15, 20 years from now, it's going to be unthinkable that AI isn't going to have percolated through almost every aspect of society. The iPhone, the Google Pixel that you have in your pocket has more computing power than the space shuttle did. And so how are we going to help make sure that not just the AI models that we're creating, the data that we're creating is diverse, but that it is being created by the most diverse group of people possible to help guard against many of those implicit biases. How can we make sure that not just the people that are using the data are conversant in data science, like Allison mentioned, but the people that are deciding on which projects to fund, the people that are interpreting the data to those who may not be as versed in a particular subject matter area, truly understand how the data is being collected, the biases that are associated with it. So I think that, kind of in a nutshell is how I, came to this area. Like I said, I started out, survey sampling, figuring out, how to conduct surveys, to figure out how many fish there are in the ocean. So we figure out how many we can sustainably harvest. That transitioned fairly quickly into using camera technologies instead of, fishers to, to image fish instead of catching them. That, of course, generated, terabytes and terabytes and millions of images that we had to process, which quickly exceeded the capabilities of our human analysts. So that came into teaching computers how to count fish. And that was really when we started to look at how the diversity in training data really affects the accuracy and the robustness of the algorithms. You can't just you can't just create training data with the best images of each fish. You have to have the fish in great lighting conditions, in bad lighting conditions, in as many different orientations as possible. And so only by creating the diversity and myriad viewpoints within the training data can you get an accurate model. And a precise and a robust model. And I think the same thing goes for our workforce.
Thank you very much. Thanks to the panel for that introduction and sharing some of your personal stories. I will remind the audience that this is your chance. There was a mention of taking responsibility for working with diversity and inclusion. Now's your chance to put some questions in the Slido. We'll get to those, but I'm going to start the panel off with a couple of questions we set up. First question, and I'll throw this out there and let you guys kind of riff on it. I won't call on you individually, but feel free to jump in and discuss amongst the team. An AI-based solution is only as equitable and responsible as the people and data used to create it. How do we foster a diverse range of participants and perspectives to engage in the development and adoption of emerging technologies, including AI?
Well, I'll start in, but I'll jump in. I thought it was very interesting that Dana said that he hadn't even known that NOAA existed until he was like in his 20s. And I will bet you dollars to donuts that a lot of the kids in the institutions that probably have a lot of diversity probably don't know what AI it is, or whether or not there's something that they want to know what it is and have anything to contribute to the whole area. And so the issue is, to what extent are we talking about these things within tribal colleges and universities, within HBCUs? I mean, you went to Howard, but it's 100 other institutions that are sitting out there that somebody can go to and begin to talk about the issues, not just of the AI as AI, but what AI will allow us to do, the tools that the tool that it represents, the questions it can help answer, the questions that it will allow you to ask. And I think that beginning to look at minority serving institutions and looking at places where you're likely to encounter the students, even to your colleges, basically to give the students, because those populations are heavily minoritized, to give those students a reason to want to kind of pursue some of these things and to begin to think about it. Or maybe I'm off the mark on that.
Yeah, so let me jump in and talk a little bit about some of what we've been trying to do at NC State to actually broaden, the engagement around data science and AI. And I think it picks up on some of the themes that Shirley was just describing. What I wanted to do is, we've just stood up what we're calling the Data Science Academy. And the goal of the Data Science Academy is to make data science available to every student, and to have it touch all the aspects of the university: research and teaching and service and outreach. And I wanted to share a few of the things that we explicitly do in the courses that we develop. And so I won't read the whole list, but here's a set that I think, we're thinking about as we're thinking about classes and training. So one of the very first things we say is, for every single class, we want the students to gain exposures to role models, including a diverse collection of AI practitioners and data scientists. The second thing we want to do, and this picks up very directly on something Shirley said, is make sure that in every course, you're exploring a current issue and making the students aware of an exciting result or discovery or the impact of AI and data science. Why do I care? How does it touch what they might be interested in doing? Another thing that we always think about is we very explicitly identify and wrestle with an ethical issue. And so this is not one class. We don't just do ethics in one course. Every single course we develop has an ethics portion to it. The next thing that we do is we also explicitly practice some aspect of making AI or AI communication more accessible to, for example, accounting for color blindness, or thinking about how you turn a visualization into something that you can understand by listening, or commenting, or captioning. So how do you think about broadening the accessibility of the methods and what we're trying to do? Another thing that we do, understanding that our students come to this practice from a variety of backgrounds, is for every assignment that we make, there are 3 different difficulty levels. And often for when we're teaching AI, that may be familiarity with coding or with mathematics, but we give the students the option to start where they are, and there's no penalty for which track you choose. So, and thinking about how would someone who did, track 1, do they get a full, robust experience of what we're trying to do in the training that encourages them to stay, that gets them excited about what they're doing, that exposes them to the diverse range of voices, And then the last 2, everything we do gives the students the opportunity to do something hands-on, that has a real flavor. And this is something that, as you're thinking about what you can do, is there a way that you as the science professional can engage, and what is the problem that you can bring that gets the student excited about what you're doing or gives them a chance to touch something? And the other thing that we always explicitly do is we always recognize that data are created based on assumptions and collection practices, and they're information resources, not truth. And they always have error bars and aspects of inclusion and exclusion. And talking about that with the students and trying to make that real within what they're learning. Again, I bring a very university perspective to this, but those are some of the things that we're trying very explicitly to do to really broaden the engagement that we see among our student population.
Yeah, I can jump in now. And I mean, I 100% agree with what both Dr. Malcolm and Dr. Wilson iterated, and just kind of looking at, my career, and what's really kind of influenced kind of me with regard to the science that I do. It's really about the mentors that are out there, you as data scientists, as AI professionals, AI ML professionals, creating those opportunities, research opportunities for folks at, historically Black colleges, minority serving institutions, working with NOAA's Office of Education, and putting aside, when when you go out and seek research funding, and I'm kind of speaking more so from a federal perspective, a government perspective, you know, putting those resources aside and within your programs, within your research groups, to bring in, you know, students, whether they be women or minorities, to learn right alongside you. You know, that piece to me is one of the best ways to increase the diversity of our workforce. And really, you know, Dr. Wilson talked about it earlier, that personal accountability. I think we all need to realize that we have a role with advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion and accessibility within the workforce, and that you do have power. You know, you run programs, you conduct research within, you know, laboratories, and you have that ability to go out, make those connections, and do outreach to school systems that serve underrepresented groups. You have that ability to go out and have those conversations with those individuals, with those organizations, and train that next generation. You know, Dr. Malcolm talked about earlier, I didn't know what NOAA is, because NOAA, for some reason, sometimes I think scientists, they don't spend a lot of time going out and in the community and communicating the science that's going on within the agency. I think that is just as important as the scientific advancement that you're making, that you go out and share that information with others. You know, to me, it's not good enough for you to just publish it in a journal article, because I didn't know what a journal article was until I went to college. So at some level, we have to take some level of responsibility and ownership of making sure that message is shared with different communities.
Yeah, I want to jump on that and a couple other things that the panel has said. So yeah, Danae, I couldn't agree more. When I first started out with the Florida Keys National Marine Sanctuary, right out of college, we had a woman on staff whose title was research interpreter. And her job was to take all of the scientific papers that, you know, scientists within the sanctuary, you know, Florida Keys Sanctuary program were publishing, and translate them into, you know, language that was more consumable and more accessible to people that weren't used to reading, you know, abstract introduction, methods, results, conclusions. And then also there was a big push to you know, publish in journals that didn't require, you know, large subscription fees, you know, that anybody could, you know, look at online. The other thing I want to talk about is, you know, we talk about public-private partnerships a lot in government these days, and you know, that's one of the ways that I see us being able to tackle some of the issues of diversity, especially that some of the ones that Eric mentioned about changes in the workforce, you know, over the past decades. That he's right. You know, our workforce hasn't changed as much as we might like it to in terms of the federal staff. That may be changing fairly quickly as more and more people get to retirement age and a new cohort comes through. But the contractors, the affiliates, the people that we work with on a fairly regular basis and are true partners in the organization, I haven't seen any good statistics on that recently, and I'd be interested to see that. But thinking about you know, the diversity in the public-private partnerships, you know, we have the preferences for the small businesses, the woman-owned businesses, things like that. But like Allison mentioned, you know, I would challenge, you know, everyone who's involved in contracting and cooperative institutes to think about, you know, not just what are the check boxes of diversity, but we really are trying to cast a wide net. And what does that mean? Who do we want to bring on? How do we bring them on? How do we bring people on in a fair and equitable manner, while ensuring the highest amount of diversity? And then the last thing that I wanted to touch on, in terms of how do we foster the most diverse range of participants and perspectives, is the open source movement. We talk a lot now about open source software, open source data. We're kind of getting there. All of our data is publicly accessible, but is it really easily publicly accessible? You know, how do we get not just the data out there, but as we start developing algorithms, how do we get the training data out there in the public eye? How do we get the algorithms out there in the public eye for a wide range of people to look at, to criticize, to improve, to iterate? You know, kind of the Wikipedia of data, if you will. And you know, we're still not doing as good a job as I think we could of data sharing. Making it easy for anybody to, you know, jump on the internet, you know, grab data, pull it down, know what they're looking at. And then also partnering with not just universities, but high schools, elementary schools. How do we weave NOAA data into elementary curricula, into high school curricula across a wide range of backgrounds and capabilities, and really trying to weave that, you know, that idea of AI, that idea of NOAA, that idea of environmental science. I think it was Admiral Gallaudet, you know, said at one point he saw a 5-year-old wandering around the National Mall with a NASA shirt on, and he said, "I want to see that same kid with a NOAA shirt on." And you know, I would say the same thing. You know, how do we get the data? How do we get the questions, you know, out into the society and start really re-engaging and re-exciting the society about what science is, which is really just about asking questions and figuring out the answers. We seem to be back in an area, in a time when science is truth, and if the science changes, then that's a flip-flop. And we say, well, no, science changes. That's called learning. That's what we're supposed to do, and getting people comfortable again with the concept of I don't know, and the concept of I'll find out, and that's okay. I think is something that we could really work on a lot.
Thank you very much. So my next question for the panel, again, I'll just throw it out for you guys. We touched on this a bit. Young people are missing out on pursuing paths that lead to careers in emerging technologies because of the unequal distribution of resources and learning opportunities across different communities. How do you see the outreach and mentorship as critical roles in educating and attracting the next generation of diverse and highly capable talent? And I'll also add to that, what makes a good mentor? What do you want to see out of a mentor that will help bring that into our workforce?
Yeah, I'll jump in just to start out. I think the COVID environment has really shown a spotlight on the inequitability within the society right now. My wife was substitute teaching at our daughter's school, and during some of the early parts of the pandemic, and so through that was engaged in a lot of the Department of Education conference calls about how schools were going to handle you know, distance learning and things of that sort. And you know, there was, you know, a lot of teachers that were talking about, well, we want to make sure that, you know, all of the iPads have the same software on them, and that, you know, everything is you know, seamless and integrated, and we want to make sure that, you know, all the kids, you know, have, you know, the high enough bandwidth to you know, consume all these applications. And then there were a whole bunch of other teachers on the call that were like, I'm trying to make sure that my kids have pencils at home. You know, do they have paper? You know, internet is not something that we're even talking about. And so I think really addressing some of those huge disparities within society is something that we can't shy away from.
I'll say, I'll just jump in again, on the theme that we've had about, how can you engage? I think what I see with students, that opportunity to really do something real. When the student gets a chance to work on a project with a real live scientist, and when they work on something and they brief it out, and somebody like a NOAA employee cares, they say, that's really interesting. You see the students light up, right? Because they're working on something that has an impact, something that is, somebody really thinks about that, and that kind of opportunity, again, opens the student's eyes to what is possible. Why is this interesting? Who cares, and why am I doing something that has an impact? And so that's one of the things that, I really like to work on, is how do I get my students, I think today talked about this, really actually doing, working on problems with scientists.
I like that. I like that idea. But I also want to say that I think that to a large extent, the students have to know that what they are working on is important to them and to their communities. And I do think that the pandemic has also shown us a way to begin to actually address some of these issues. We have unevenness among the different school systems. The schools that Black and brown kids tend to be not offering these kinds of courses. They tend to be assuming that the students can't learn or aren't smart or won't be engaged by this, or whatever it is, whatever the reasons for that, that means that they don't get the good stuff. Well, we've all gone online. And quite frankly, since schools aren't buying textbooks, quote unquote, they can buy devices. And I understand that we do have issues, and they could buy hotspots. But I understand that there are issues with regard to access to all of this. But we can't let that stop us thinking about what's possible. And I do think that offering the kind of scaled down or young version of the course that you were talking about, Allison, which I find really exciting. I think I want to sign up for it. But the issue is, can we do that in an online environment so that it doesn't matter how depressed or under-resourced or with lower expectations the schools might have? Can we begin to really imagine a different kind of access and possibility that we offer to the students? I just saw that the EPA report that just came out that talked about disproportionate impacts of climate change on socially vulnerable populations in the United States. And anybody who's basically been paying attention about all these tropical storms and hurricanes that we have been having around the Gulf, the story isn't just about the people and the amount of water, et cetera, et cetera. But there is an important story in the climate change that is actually contributing to that. And there's an important story in the models that allow you to predict where these things are going to hit. And those are so that you can get the people out of the way to the extent that you can. But I think that those are compelling stories to anyone, to the kids, to their parents, et cetera. And there's a whole bunch of data behind all of this. And so where can we begin to kind of help students see the possibilities, help their parents see the possibilities, so that in fact, that we tell these stories, as you say, not at the journal level, but at the newspaper level, at the Facebook level, at the website level, at the level where people can understand and begin to understand why it is important to know this and how you can become a part of the knowing. And I think that that is what I'd like to see us basically dispense with the idea of the size of the problem and embrace the size of the opportunity.
Yeah, and following along on that, like you said, in terms of how do we get things translated to the Facebook level, to the YouTube level, things like that, and and partnering with the people that can make that happen. We often spend a lot of time figuring out how to train scientists to talk to lawyers or talk to the public or talk to reporters, and that's good. We should be doing that, but also partnering with the people that are already good at spreading the message. And this is the message that, you know, we want to spread, or this is the information that we want to get out. You're good at getting it out. We will partner with you. You know, lest I say the science influencer, you know, side of things.
Yeah, but there's also this trust issue that got raised, and I want to just basically kind of drop a couple of ideas about how we can begin to get the trust issues in place. Remember, we talked about the need for diversity within the workforce, but there are the opportunities. For example, I'm a regent at Morgan State University, okay? And Morgan State has a School of Global Journalism, okay, and Communications. And one of the things that the new dean is talking about is preparing some of the people who are going to be in journalism to be science journalists, to be health journalists, medical journalists, to begin to understand and marry some of these issues. Well, to the extent that they can then offer these stories as people of color into the spaces where people are, to the extent that these stories can be in the Afro, not just in the Baltimore Sun, to the extent that there is more kind of a circulation of ideas in other languages, in Spanish, in whatever, that we can begin to really help people understand. Not only do we think that you need the knowledge, but we think that you need to look at the opportunity to become a knowledge creator.
Definitely. And you know, I love that concept that in many cases the messenger is almost as important as the message. And we dealt with that you know, in South Florida and many other areas where it's important that the message come to me from someone who has a similar life story to me, and can talk in a way that's consumable to me and can answer questions that are important to me, rather than the message coming from someone who is perceived as the other.
Yeah, and I think just kind of building off of that, I think that's why it's important, you know, when we think about kind of representation, it actually really does matter. You know, I remember one time I was putting together a panel at a American Meteorological Society conference, and you know, for some reason, I was just totally ambivalent with regards to who I was putting on the panel. It was pretty much all white males. And as an African American, as a person that advocates for diversity, equity, inclusion, I was kind of shocked by myself. And someone had to really kind of basically let me know what I was doing. And I don't know if I was just in, you know, basically ambivalent, or just didn't have a wide array of speakers that I could really choose from for this particular topic. But, you know, I quickly realized what I was doing after, you know, someone pulled me to the side to talk about this. And, you know, it's really easy to go with the norm. Sometimes it can be a little bit more difficult, takes a little bit of extra planning to find those hidden figures, those gems out there that are that really want to contribute to the science and contribute to the understanding of the science. And it kind of makes me think a little bit about your question, Eric, with regards to mentors. What does a good, you know, mentor actually look like? You know, to me, that some of my best mentors were people that would, at some level, you know, get an opportunity, take the time out to understand who I was. You know, there's a lot of people, and I think we mentioned it earlier, that from an equity standpoint, you know, there's a lot of kids out there that don't have pencils and paper rather than just internet, right? Like you said, Ben. And you know, that particular piece, understanding that those kids, that there are kids out there that come from those backgrounds. You know, just imagine if they're a part of a conversation like this, part of an AI conference like this. What kind of questions are they gonna have? You know, they may not understand, you know, 90% of what's going on, but hey, who's going to take the time to sit them down and give them that opportunity to ask those, you know, just basic questions about artificial intelligence, about, you know, what is equity, what is truth in data, basically, and all of those things. You know, it's really basically you take the time out to actually get to know the individual, get to know their background, where they're coming from, so that they can actually feel comfortable with asking those simple, basic questions and get the information that they need in order to build their knowledge base and to build their confidence as well. You know, I can't imagine how, you know, difficult it would be for a young person to come into a conversation like what we're having today without much experience doing this type of work, and be willing to ask the basic, simple questions that they would actually have with regards to trying to gain the level of understanding that they would need to have in order to actually be a part of this field.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. That was a great discussion. Quick reminder to our audience, we're going to go to the questions from the audience now. We have about 20 minutes by my watch. Actually, I don't have a watch, I have a cell phone. And we'll go to a audience question. So if you have one that you'd particularly like to see discussed, we'll probably only be able to get through a couple. Please upvote them or add your own question. I'll pick one of the ones that's at the top right at the moment. Can anyone speak on retention as it relates to diversity, and or what's being done to make sure that the workforce is diverse and inclusive at all levels?
Can anybody speak to retention? Almost everybody talks about recruitment, but they tend not to talk about retention. But I will tell you this, and that is that happy people don't leave. People get pushed out, and they get pushed out because they fail to see opportunity because of the work in the environment in which they're asked to work, by being invisible, not heard, disrespected, and all of us have encountered at some point some variation on that. And I do think that this whole question of like, what is the environment in which the work is being done is one that we tend not to ask that much. And that's one of the reasons that I've been working with the disciplinary societies to try to stand up sea change at the departmental level. Because oftentimes this disrespect and this whatever it is happens kind of like where the rubber meets the road in the research environment, and understanding that it isn't just how good is somebody's idea and how good is their research, but how good is their research environment. And I think that to the extent that that we are honest about the kind of working conditions and what have you that we're asking people to put up with, as I said, happy people don't leave.
Can I just quickly add, you know, I think, you know, happy people is very important, but also people that find community within the spaces that they're in. I think there's been a kind of surge in the terminology of employee resource groups. That can be one way to find community. You know, I started an employee resource group before I even knew what an employee resource group was, because I needed to find you know, a community of people that I could reach out to, that I could connect with, that, you know, could potentially be having similar experiences to what I'm experiencing being one of the, few African-American PhD research meteorologists in NOAA, right? And so, finding that community is another way of retaining people. And I don't, I've even heard people say, if I didn't find this particular community, I would have left NOAA, because people have options today. You don't have to stay working within a space that is, unwelcoming, that is, biased towards who you are. And I think young people understand that way more than people that are, 5 and 10 years, 20 years older than me that are still in the workforce. They don't feel like they have to spend their entire career working within, one particular space. If they, get an inkling that they are unhappy or that they're unwelcome to a particular space, you know what? I can go find a different one.
Yeah, and following on what both of you were saying, within those ERGs and in terms of retention, a lot of employees want to see what their career path is. How do they get from step A to step D, and having someone that they identify with who is in the place that they want to go and in the place that they want to be is important, both from a mentorship opportunity of how do I get from A to E, but also just seeing that that's possible and have it being implicitly possible at a subconscious level. It's been somewhat within my lifetime that we've talked about glass ceilings and things of that sort, and having those opportunities just to see what is possible, not just theoretically but practically, that oh yeah, there's someone like me doing what I want to do. I can do that.
All right, thank you. The next top question, what are the measures of diversity, equity, and inclusion that are being used to ensure that the efforts being undertaken to increase and improve diversity throughout the workforce are working, to track them over time? And I know you guys can't speak specifically for NOAA's efforts, but maybe what are the measures that should be being used in order to track progress over time? What should we be doing?
First of all, you should be collecting it. And the second is you ought to be collecting it in the most disaggregated way that you can possibly imagine. Because what tends to happen is that all women get lumped together, for example, and all Blacks get lumped together, and all of this group gets lumped together. So you can end up with people who live in the intersectional space the way that I do, at very, very low numbers, but you'll never know it because unless you collect the data in that way, that you could be disaggregated.
Yeah, it's a nice way of saying, what I was trying to think about in terms of diversity isn't a static thing. It's not something that you can just do and then be done. Your measures of diversity have to be mutable, have to be continually updated, continually revisited, looked at one way, looked at another way, because you're going to want different types of diversity for different problems, and being able to look at teams and look at applicant pools in as many different ways as possible is important. And so having that granular level that Shirley mentioned is incredibly important.
Any other thoughts from the panel? All right, let's
well, one of the things that I would raise is that don't just look at representational diversity. Look at, for example, I don't know the extent to which climate surveys get done, but look to see how people are actually experiencing their space.
Excellent point. All right, next question. Lots of discussion about diversifying teams that make the AI tools and the data that train the AI tools, but there should be just as many discussions about the diversity of communities impacted and benefiting from these tools, yes? make sure that these tools get used by all communities. What can you add on that thought?
Yeah, I think that's one of the areas that government can really play a role. You know, a lot of AI development is being done in the private sector and largely profit driven, and there are particular pools that are served well by that. And one of the area roles of government is to help fill in those gaps where there isn't a profit driven motivation.
And that's where some of the real squirrely stuff happens.
Okay, next question may be our last question for the panel. So, and it's a pretty profound question. What are the long-term consequences if we ignore diversity and inclusion as we integrate AI into NOAA missions?
We make a lot more mistakes and we get it wrong a lot more frequently.
Yeah, I was kind of thinking along the same lines. I think if we don't take it into account, then we continue to perpetuate the have and the have-nots. And this is really, you can look at that socioeconomically, but in this particular sense, I'm looking at it from a kind of accessibility kind of perspective, because, information is power, right? Data in the same sense can be very, very powerful. I would imagine, a lot of money is made off of data. We all know that that's the truth, and the folks that learn how to use that information for economic benefit, those are some really powerful folks, right? And it kind of leaves behind the people that don't know how to actually access or process that particular information for their own economic benefit. So, that ability to perpetuate, this difference in society, this really kind of, to me, is one of the things that we need to continue to look at from a government perspective, because we should as a government agency, we should seek to erase some of that have and have not mentality.
And Shirley's probably one of the best to talk about this, but it also completely erodes the concept of trust that we talk about, and getting the science out into the community and getting people to trust it and consume it. So yeah, Shirley, take it away.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is that you put your finger right on it. Whose questions get asked and answered? Who do you believe? Why is this important? What I think of as important may not be what you think of as important. I mean, I just look at the mistakes that have been made in the commercial community around the whole facial recognition technology. And you want to talk about putting a sour taste in people's mouth, that really doesn't. No, because we know that there are huge error rates. We know that this stuff is sitting out there waiting to bite us into whatever. And we've seen instances now of where policing, for example, we've seen the use in policing, and we've seen what happened in those communities. And you can feel, it's almost palpable. You can feel the resistance rising when around those kinds of situations. And, I was telling somebody, I said, I'm just waiting until TSA decides to put it into airports. And I get stopped 3 times more than anybody else because I'm a member of a group where it works least. And so you can imagine how I'm going to feel about that. And I think that applying it to other fields and other conditions and other research questions, it's going to, the kind of the bad taste is going to, unfortunately, I worry that it's going to drift over into other places where it gets applied.
Well, with that, I will say thank you to the panel. That was really great. I mean, it was so important to us when we were organizing this to not only get through the technologies and the tools and exchange data and all that, but to really think about how we can build a diverse workforce. And I know I took several pages of notes, which I realized about halfway through I probably didn't have to do because this is recorded and I can go back and look at it. But I appreciate the effort you guys put into, obviously you put some thought into this, and I really appreciate your time. So I'm going to send it back over to Douglas to close this out. But again, thank you, panel. That was a really wonderful way to end our workshop.
Thank you, Eric, and thanks to all the panelists for talking about this really important topic. Like Eric said, when we were planning this workshop, we really want to make sure that this topic is covered and make sure that the group community have a shared vision going forward and to diversify this topic. And I think at this moment, I'm just rumbling. So I'm going to stop talking and want to thank everyone who joined our workshop this year. And as always, the conversation goes on in our Slack space. That's why we created it. So if you haven't joined that, you can still join that. The link is still available. And we will hopefully see you next year. Thanks, Allison. Thanks, Ben, Shirley, and Danae joining us for this closing plenary session.